Have you ever walked into someone's home thinking it was just a place to stay, only to realize it would change everything you believed about trust, family, and yourself? That's exactly what happened to me. My name is Emma, and I'm 22 years old. When my mom left for an overseas job assignment, I never imagined I'd end up living with my late father's best friend, the man who used to babysit me when I was little. But sometimes, life takes us to places where comfort and confusion quietly coexist. This is my story. A story about boundaries, connection, and the emotions we never see coming. The drive to Asheville was long and silent. I remember staring out the car window, watching the rain blur the mountains into soft blue shapes. It was peaceful, but also lonely, like the world had pressed the mute button. My mother had always been the strong one, moving from place to place, chasing better opportunities. But when her company sent her overseas for almost a year, she didn't want me living alone in the city. So she called Daniel. Daniel had been my father's closest friend, the kind of man who showed up when no one else did. After Dad's death, he helped us move, fix things around the house, and sent birthday cards every single year without fail. He and his wife, Clara, lived in a quiet town outside Asheville, North Carolina. When he offered me a place to stay, it felt safe, or at least it was supposed to. When I arrived, Daniel met me at the door with his familiar warm smile. He looked older, a few more gray strands in his hair, but the same calm energy. Clara stood beside him, graceful as always, but her expression was harder to read. "Welcome, Emma," Daniel said, taking my bags. "Thank you," I replied, smiling nervously. "It's really kind of you both to let me stay." The house was beautiful. Soft wood tones, large windows that overlooked a garden, and the faint smell of pine that made everything feel like a cabin retreat. Clara gave me a quick tour. Kitchen, guest room, studio, backyard, all perfectly tidy, almost too perfect. My room faced the woods. The evening light poured in through the curtains, bathing the room in gold. I set my sketchbooks on the desk and took a deep breath. It was quiet here. A kind of quiet that made you hear your own thoughts too clearly. That first night, I unpacked while Daniel and Clara talked in the living room. Their laughter echoed faintly down the hall, and for a brief moment, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: stability. Over the next few days, I slipped into a new rhythm. Mornings were for my online design classes, afternoons for freelance work, and evenings for family dinners. Daniel often asked about my projects. He had an old interest in art and would spend time reviewing my sketches, offering gentle advice. He wasn't just helping. He understood. He noticed the small things, how I pressed too hard when I was anxious, or how I'd switch between coffee and tea depending on my mood. Clara, on the other hand, was kind but distant. She was polite, but I could sense she preferred her own space. She worked from home as a therapist, always calm and composed, sometimes too composed, like she was trained to hide her emotions. One weekend, Daniel offered to show me around Asheville. We visited art galleries, old bookstores, and a small cafe tucked behind a row of antique shops. He asked about my future plans, my inspirations, and what I wanted after graduation. His interest felt genuine. It was refreshing. Someone actually listening instead of just waiting to talk. "You've got real talent," he said as he looked through my portfolio on my tablet. "Your dad would have loved this." My chest tightened. It had been years since anyone mentioned my father's name that way, not as a memory, but as if he was still part of the conversation. That moment hit me harder than I expected. I looked at Daniel and smiled softly. He used to say that too, that art was how we make sense of chaos. Daniel nodded. He was right. You've got his spirit, Emma. Don't lose that. For the rest of the day, I couldn't stop thinking about that conversation. It wasn't romantic, it was emotional, like reconnecting with a missing part of myself. But as the days passed, something subtle began to shift. I started noticing how Daniel's presence calmed me, how I'd look forward to our conversations, how his encouragement made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about attraction. It was emotional gravity, the kind that pulls you closer without you realizing it. One rainy evening, we were sitting in the living room. Clara was out visiting a client, and the house was unusually quiet. I was showing Daniel one of my new digital sketches. He leaned over slightly, pointing at a line I'd drawn wrong. "See this?" he said, his tone patient. "You're overcomplicating it. Sometimes less is more." Our eyes met briefly, a simple, ordinary moment. But it lingered. There was warmth in his voice, and for some reason, I couldn't look away right away. For a second, the world slowed down. The rain outside, the clock ticking, even my breathing. Then Daniel smiled and leaned back, breaking the tension effortlessly. "Don't stay up too late working," he said kindly. "You've got class tomorrow," I nodded, my heart still racing for reasons I didn't fully understand. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake a single thought. How easily comfort can turn into something else. Not love, not desire, just connection that feels too deep, too human to name. And maybe that's where all stories like this begin, quietly, without warning. Sometimes, change doesn't arrive with noise. It slips in quietly, hiding behind familiar smiles and everyday routines, and before you realize it, something feels different. After that rainy night, nothing really changed on the surface, but everything felt slightly off. Daniel was still kind, still patient, still his usual calm self. Yet there was a new awareness in the air, like we both knew something unspoken had happened, and neither of us wanted to name it. My days were still the same: design classes, freelance work, and helping Clara in the kitchen whenever she let me. But even the smallest details began to feel heavier, like the way Daniel's footsteps sounded from his office down the hall, or how his voice softened when he called my name, or how, every time I caught his eye at dinner, I'd look away too quickly. It wasn't attraction. It was discomfort. The kind that comes when your emotions start crossing lines your logic doesn't approve of. One evening, Clara and I were preparing dinner together, chopping vegetables in silence, the soft hum of the oven filling the kitchen. Out of nowhere, she asked, "So how are you settling in, Emma?" Her tone was casual, but her eyes, calm, sharp, unreadable, made me feel like I was under a microscope. "I'm good," I said quickly. "The classes are going well. Daniel's been helping me with my sketches," she smiled faintly. "He enjoys that. He's always had a thing for art." Then, after a pause, she added, "He also gets attached easily." That last line wasn't said with judgment, just observation, but it stayed with me all night. The next few weeks blurred together. Work, study, dinner, sleep. But under that rhythm, something was shifting quietly, like a current under calm water. Daniel started keeping more distance. Maybe he felt it too. Our conversations became shorter, more formal. No more sketch reviews at night. No more long walks to the cafe. Part of me felt relieved. Another part, the lonelier part, missed those moments more than I wanted to admit. To distract myself, I threw all my energy into an upcoming design exhibition. It was my first big online showcase, and Daniel had promised to help me prepare. One afternoon, as I was struggling with my project files, my laptop froze. I groaned loudly, frustration bubbling up. Daniel, hearing the noise, stepped into my room. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, no," I sighed. The system crashed again. He walked over, leaned down to look at the screen, and started helping me fix it. His presence still had that same steady calm, the kind that made chaos feel manageable. When he finally fixed it, I laughed in relief. "You're a lifesaver." He smiled, that familiar warmth in his eyes. "Just glad I could help." Then he hesitated, for the first time, uncertain. "Emma," he said quietly, "I think it's best if we keep a little distance, just until things feel normal again." His honesty hit harder than I expected. My chest tightened, but I nodded. "Yeah, I get it, and I did. It was the right thing. But right things often hurt the most." Days passed. We spoke less. Clara seemed lighter, almost relieved. She'd invite me to join her for walks or tea in the garden. Slowly, I started seeing her differently. She wasn't cold, she was cautious, like someone who had learned to protect her peace. One evening, while sitting with her outside, she said something I'll never forget. "You remind Daniel a lot of your father. Same energy, same light. Maybe that's why he cares so much." I froze. "He talks about my dad?" "Sometimes," she said, looking up at the fading sky. "Your father was his anchor once. Losing him changed Daniel more than he admits." For the first time, the puzzle made sense. Maybe what I'd mistaken for connection wasn't really about me. It was about memory, a bridge between past and present, between grief and comfort. Still, that realization didn't erase the feeling, the quiet ache that comes when two souls understand each other in ways words can't explain. That night, I found myself standing by my window, staring at the forest outside. The air was cool still, and full of distant echoes. Crickets, wind, the hum of life continuing as always. But inside, something had shifted. I wasn't just a guest anymore. I was part of a story I didn't mean to write. The next morning, Daniel left early for a short business trip. Clara told me he'd be gone for a week. The house felt emptier without him. Not just physically, but emotionally. The silence had weight. I spent my days working on my art and evenings journaling, and slowly, I began to see things more clearly. My own patterns, my own needs, my craving for emotional validation. It wasn't Daniel I missed. It was the feeling of being seen, and maybe that's the most dangerous kind of attachment. The one that makes you believe you need someone else to feel whole. But the truth is, distance doesn't always solve things. Sometimes it just gives the heart space to ask deeper questions. And that's exactly what happened the night Daniel returned, when everything I thought I understood started to fall apart again. Sometimes when you create distance to protect yourself, life brings that person right back, not to restart something, but to teach you what you still need to face. The morning Daniel returned, the house felt strangely alive again, like it had been holding its breath while he was gone. I was in the kitchen, making tea when I heard the familiar sound of his car pulling into the driveway. My heart skipped, then raced, and I hated that it did. I told myself it was just relief, that things would finally feel normal again. When he walked in, suitcase in hand, he smiled. "Hey, stranger." "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "How was the trip?" "Exhausting," he replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "But it's good to be home." Clara came out from her office to greet him, her face lighting up. She hugged him warmly, and for a second, watching them, I felt like an outsider in a story I didn't belong to. That night, we had dinner together, the three of us. It should have been ordinary, but there was something about Daniel's voice, the way he laughed, the way his eyes softened when he spoke to me, that made my chest tighten. It wasn't longing. It was memory. That same feeling I used to get as a child when my dad came home from work. The sense that someone's presence made the world safer. After dinner, Clara went upstairs early, and Daniel stayed behind to clean up. I offered to help, but he shook his head gently. "You've done enough. Emma, go rest." But I stayed anyway, drying dishes beside him. For a while, we worked in silence. The kind that's not uncomfortable, just heavy. Finally, he broke it. "Clara told me you've been busy with your art," he said. "Yeah," I replied softly. "The exhibition went well. I even got a few offers for commissions." "That's incredible," he said, smiling. "I'm proud of you." Something about that word, proud, hit me deeper than it should have. It had been years since anyone had said that to me and meant it. Before I could reply, he continued quietly. "I wasn't sure how things would be when I got back. I didn't want to make things awkward." His honesty disarmed me. "They're not awkward," I said, though my voice wavered. "They're just different," he nodded, looking at the sink. "Different can be good." Maybe he was right. Maybe it could. The days after his return felt calmer. Daniel seemed more careful, not distant but grounded. Clara was more open too, inviting me into their routines, their small rituals. Morning coffee on the porch, movie nights, long conversations about books and life. It was peaceful. But that peace carried an undercurrent, a quiet awareness of everything we weren't saying. One evening, while working on a new illustration, I realized something strange. The man I was drawing, an older figure standing near the sea, looked exactly like Daniel. I hadn't planned it. It just happened. I stared at the sketch for a long time. Then I tore it out and tucked it into a drawer. Some feelings are better expressed in silence. A few days later, Clara invited me to join her at a local art fair. It was crowded, vibrant, full of color and noise. A beautiful distraction. As we walked through the stalls, she suddenly turned to me and said, "You know, when Daniel and I first married, I was younger than you are now." I blinked, surprised. "Really?" She nodded. "It wasn't easy. He'd lost a lot before we met. I spent years trying to fill spaces I couldn't see." There was a quiet sadness in her tone. Not bitterness, just truth. She looked at me and smiled faintly. "You remind him of who he used to be. That's not your fault, Emma. But don't let someone else's nostalgia become your burden." Her words stayed with me the entire ride home. That night, I sat in my room with my sketchbook open, the lamplight soft on the pages. I thought about what she said. About how we sometimes become mirrors for other people's unfinished stories. Maybe that's all this was. Not love. Not longing, but reflection. Daniel saw pieces of his past in me, and I saw comfort in him. Two lonely people holding up mirrors without realizing it. Later, I heard a knock on my door. It was Daniel. "Can we talk?" he asked gently. I nodded. He stepped inside, looking unsure of where to begin. "Clara told me what she said earlier. I hope it didn't make you uncomfortable." "It didn't," I said softly. "She's right, though." He hesitated. "Right about what?" "That we both found something familiar in each other, and maybe we've been holding on to it for the wrong reasons." He exhaled slowly, as if releasing something he'd been carrying. "Maybe," he said, "but I'm still grateful. You reminded me what connection feels like. The kind that doesn't need to be romantic to matter." For the first time, I saw him not as my father's friend or as someone older, wiser, but simply as a person. Flawed, human, searching. I smiled. I think we both needed that reminder. He smiled back. A real one this time, light and unburdened. And in that moment, the tension that had followed us for weeks finally dissolved. There was no spark, no longing, no guilt, Just understanding were quiet, simple, and healing. That night, I sat by the window again, watching the trees sway under the moonlight, and for the first time since I arrived in Asheville, I felt at peace, because sometimes closure doesn't come from walking away. It comes from seeing things clearly, and maybe that was what this story had always been about. Not every story ends with a grand confession or heartbreak. Some end quietly, with acceptance, peace, and the strength to finally move forward. A few weeks after that night, Asheville began to change color. The leaves turned gold and copper, the mornings grew colder, and the air carried that crisp, familiar scent of endings, the kind that tell you something new is waiting on the other side. I had been in Daniel and Clara's house for almost 5 months. What started as a temporary stay had turned into something deeper, not because of what happened, but because of what I learned about myself. Clara noticed the change first. "You've been smiling more," she said one morning, handing me a mug of coffee. I laughed softly. "Maybe I finally found my rhythm," she smiled knowingly. "Or maybe you finally stopped looking for it in someone else." I didn't reply, but she was right. My final project for design school was due that month. It was a visual storytelling series called Echoes of Stillness. Each piece represented a phase of my time here: confusion, comfort, conflict, clarity. Daniel offered to help me frame the prints. As we worked side by side, there was a lightness between us that hadn't been there before. No unspoken tension, no emotional weight, just genuine companionship. He looked at one of my drawings, a figure standing in the rain, looking toward a house filled with light. "Is that this place?" he asked. "Sort of," I said. "It's about how we carry people, how some stay as memories, not destinations." He nodded, eyes soft. "That's beautiful, Emma." And for the first time, hearing that didn't sting. It felt freeing. On my last week in Asheville, I decided to visit the cafe we'd gone to months ago, the one tucked behind the row of antique shops. I sat by the window with my sketchbook, watching strangers pass by. Each face carried a story, each moment an emotion, and I realized that's what life is, a collection of fleeting connections that shape us, even when they don't stay. As I sketched, I caught my reflection in the glass. Not the same girl who had arrived here uncertain and searching. I looked grounded, older maybe, not because of time, but because I'd finally learned what it meant to belong to myself. That evening, I returned home to find Daniel and Clara waiting with dinner. A quiet celebration, homemade pasta, candles, laughter that came easily. Afterward, Daniel raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he said. I smiled. "And to unfinished stories, the ones that teach us who we are." We clinked glasses. It felt like a goodbye that didn't hurt. Later that night, I walked out to the garden one last time. The sky above Asheville was a deep violet, stars scattered like fragments of memory. I stood there, breathing in the cool air, thinking about everything that had happened, and everything that hadn't. Sometimes, what doesn't happen shapes you more than what does. Daniel didn't become the love I thought I was missing. Clara didn't become a stranger I had to tiptoe around. And I didn't become someone lost in confusion. Instead, we all became mirrors for one another, reflecting our broken parts, our quiet hopes, and the unspoken need to heal. The morning I left, Daniel loaded my suitcase into the car while Clara hugged me tightly. "You'll do great things, Emma," she said. "Just remember, and don't let your art be about people. Let it be about truth." Daniel smiled, his voice steady. "You know where home is if you ever need it." I nodded, my heart full but light. "I know. Thank you for everything." As we drove away, I watched their house disappear behind the curve of the road, sunlight spilling over the trees. I didn't cry. I didn't feel loss, just gratitude. Because not every connection is meant to last forever,